Okay, so we are doing a little intro to the standards working group that I think alluded to this morning during the CPC retro. This is a space for all of the projects if you want to come, collaborate on standards. We have a repo where we organize our work. This is also in the, if you wanted to click on these, it's in the issue for the Collab Summit, the slides. And then you can check out all the past videos of our meetings on YouTube. But you may not be aware that OpenJS's projects have had a pretty long history influencing web standards. And I think that's pretty cool. And that's kind of the primary driver behind like having a standards working group in the first place. When I think actually this started because of a session that we had at Collab Summit in Berlin or something like that. I think our working group started there. Now that's coming to mind. I know it was a while ago, dude. I know I'm old. God. So, yeah. Well, so a timeline. I guess that would have been 2016 or 2017, somewhere in that realm. Christian might know. I don't know. Anyway, so my memory is super good too. So we evaluated different things that we could do with this group, and that's this list that you see before you. Strategically, what's the best way to direct our limited resources and our limited energy? And again, just like really hyper quick history here. The jQuery Foundation, yes, there was a jQuery Foundation a long time ago, sent people to TC39. They sent Yehuda and they sent Rick and they sent some other folks to go, represent generically web developers, but also, the jQuery project was filling a lot of gaps, and so they were participating there. And then the JS Foundation sort of inherited that. We had Moment.js, which has been pretty influential on this TC39 work. We've had Globalize, which has been influential on the internationalization spec, and so on. So we've got all these like projects that have been a big part of that. And so we just kind of wanted to carry that forward into the OpenJS Foundation, and we're doing that through the working group. So strategic directions that we looked at, like if we got everybody together, what could our purpose be? What could we really be spending our time on? And ultimately, after interviewing a lot of the projects and talking to a lot of you all, the primary direction that was asked was like, can you help us, create more opportunities for our JS community, for our open source projects to convene, build opinions, share feedback, and so on, if we needed to and wanted to go provide feedback to a W3C working group, or to the TC39, or to TC53, or to any of those other groups. And then secondarily, we had a lot of feedback from people who said, I would like to get more involved in this, but it's fucking confusing. So, how can we help newcomers to a standardization effort feel like they can participate and like learn and onboard and kind of figure out what that system is all about, because it is a lot different from open source development. So our group focused on 2 and 5, thanks to input from many of you all. And then, with number 6, making it a place that was hopefully jerk-free or jerk reduction strategy as a consequence. So when we think of our projects and things that we want to do as efforts in the standards working group, it's with those 2 primary strategic directions in mind. Doesn't mean we won't eventually maybe come back to some of these. It's just this is where we feel like our communities want us to spend more time. So our purpose, and this is on the repo, is to actively monitor evolving standards and educate projects about developments that might affect them, and help them formulate strategies that they can take to different standards developing organizations. This does not mean that we're a place to develop those specs. We're not trying to be a space for specification development ourselves, we're an open source organization. That is our remit. What we might do is provide feedback on a proposal that you are considering, or feedback on some effort that your project has highlighted. If you wanted to talk to us as a safe space, sort of to kick the tires on that, but we're not going to be authoring OpenJS specs anytime soon. So things that we have spent our time on lately, we published a concise guide to identifying and resolving a web platform bug. For a time, there was some decent documentation on how to do this, and we found that had kind of gone out of date and / had fallen off the radar, was hard to surface. So we just sort of refreshed some documentation and cited a lot of great resources that already are out there in the wild. So this is a living document. We have been supporting a woman named Leah Veru. If you don't know Leah, she's awesome. But she is a representative on the W3C's technical architecture group. And we support her to attend. She represents the OpenJS community. And recently, a big conversation at the W3C tag has been on how can we get more input, more engagement with the open source developer community, because, frankly, browser engineers write C, they don't write JavaScript. So we need some more input from our actual users and our actual people using these APIs. So that's been really valuable. She comes to the meetings and does report outs, and we have really great conversations for her to take back. We manage the liaison relationships and partnerships with other standards developing organizations. So that's ECMA International, the Unicode Consortium, and W3C, and then also Open Source Initiative. So those are the 4 that OpenJS is officially affiliated with. There are things that we have to do from time to time for those, like participate in, votes and things like that. So we typically try and post that. If you're interested in getting involved there, that's a way you can. There's a Secure the Web Forward workshop, which I'm pretty jazzed about. This is a W3C workshop, if you've ever been to one of those. They're very collaborative. They're more like this. They're like, somebody will get up and gab for a little bit, and then they kind of do breakout sessions, and usually keep it kind of small. And anyway, we were trying to have this in June in London, but we just don't have enough time to pull all the right people together, so we're going to postpone it probably till the fall. Probably have it in connection with some other events so we know that more people can make it. But we're looking for people who want to, submit a proposal, or it doesn't even have to be like it's not a talk proposal, right? It's like, this is a problem and, we need help, or I want to talk about potential solutions, So that is, I want you to go there, and I want you to go to there, please, and submit a workshop session. So these are some of the activities that we've been working on, and we'll continue to push forward. And then coming up next, we are going to revise the guidelines for participation and representation. So we have, from the OpenJS community, a handful of folks who wear that banner when they go to TC39 plenaries, for example. Jordan, Guy, some of you have done that for us. We have folks who do that at W3C, OSI, Unicode. And the idea is that when you're there wearing the OpenJS, banner, you're not there necessarily on behalf of your company. You're there because the project has some problem that they are trying to provide feedback to the spec on. And we want to just provide more guidance for folks who are wearing that badge, not just for them, but also for the TCs and the working groups. So it's more clear, here's what those folks are there to do. And here's documentation that you can rely on if we send Wes and he turns out to be a jerk. And, just kidding. Wes would never do that. That's why I say that. What can you do? And so this is actually great feedback recently from Guy that we need to kind of bolster this a little bit for the TC chairs. Documentation of impact. So where have our projects been influencing these specifications? I think this is really important because, again, we have a really long history of doing this as a community, but we've done kind of a terrible job telling that story either in whole or in part. And if we could do better at this, we could really, I think, influence things and shake things up in a really powerful way. So I don't know how we're going to solve that problem because that's going to be hard, but I think it's really important to start asking the question and to get that in your brains is something that we want to be tracking. And then, of course, we want to do more concise guides and resources for open source projects at the OpenJS Foundation and for our developers. How can they get involved? How can they accomplish a goal they might have? There's a lot that goes into developing a specification, a lot of skills that you need. Not all of them are analogous to software development. It looks a lot more like diplomacy. So how can we help people prepare for the cold, hard realities of standards warfare? Just kidding. What we want to talk about today is how to leverage the foundation and just cross-project participation in the standards working group. So these are kind of just the discussion questions. I've kind of framed them as what our objectives are as a working group and some of the questions that we have kicked around that we would love your feedback on. So as I mentioned, OpenJS are members of ECMA, Unicode Consortium, W3C, and Open Source Initiative. Are there other organizations that you need to liaise with? Are you doing any liaising that you think we should know about? That kind of thing helps us connect to the problem of telling the story of where our impact is, right? For existing relationships that we have, like with the TC39, are we coordinating and helping projects to coordinate with the right people so that they're getting representative feedback? And it's not just one person's really strongly held opinion about the way something should work. Cool, but that may not be representative of the entire node project. So, for example, let's make it clear when and help projects kind of navigate that if they want to give project feedback to a working group as Node or jQuery or whatever versus Jory thinks you should do this. Which I'll give you that for free. Can we help you with a consensus view across your project, across all projects? This is something that we might need to engage other OpenJS Foundation projects on. And then, other opportunities like recently with the Winners Community Group, W3C, that you want to explore. And that was a great example of James Snell came and spoke to us early and just said, hey, this is what we're trying to kick around. And we talked to him about what W3C community groups could possibly do. And it's been a great, I think, way to start those conversations. So, and we've done a few of these. We've had a few of you all from the community come and talk about potential opportunities for collaboration. So this is sort of the first slide. What do you think? How would you how can I help you, help your projects, help standards, and collect and give and facilitate this feedback gathering process in a clear way? Tell me. I'm all ears.
So I think it would be pretty soul crushing for someone to have to come back and like report on everything that was said, because that wouldn't be good.
No.
But even just like hey, here's all the stuff that we attended, like all the meeting minutes that were captured by each of the projects. And I know we sort of do that, but we don't really have like a coordinated place to say what's new in the standards that might impact my project in the past 6 months. And so it's kind of, you look everywhere. There's stuff on CC39. It's scattered across the web. So if we were just better at indexing it and organizing it, or maybe we blog once a month with all the stuff that like is out there, hidden in plain sight, that would help me. Because like I maintain an editor project, and I learned a few weeks ago from someone that like there's a new standard being worked on for rich text editing finally, like 20 years later. And I had no idea that was even in the works, and I'd love to participate in that, but I didn't even know it existed. So I think it's just awareness, or just wading through the noise sometimes. It's hard.
So we do have, like, at the start of our standards SWG meetings, like, if there's been a plenary or if there's been a meeting, like, the representative who attended will give a brief. But I don't think that we're good at, like, saying, oh, okay, thanks for this report, and now let's turn that into Hemanth, who does the wonderful summaries of the we don't want to like duplicate good work that's already out there. We just want to like
link to it, organize it.
Yeah, organize it and connect impact for sure.
Yep.
What about, I know you mentioned the other standard groups you already have. What about like more like private companies that might or not implement some of the work that come from these groups, right? Like, is there anything in mind when it comes to that? Let's say like Google has V8, right? And implements, like it is an implementation of the ECMAScript, right? Is there anything that comes in mind like with that kind of interaction, like something that can, I don't know, anything that comes in mind?
So that's a good question, and it actually kind of speaks to a line that we draw, right? Standards are different from open source in a variety of ways. The way that OpenJS engages in standards bodies is different from the way that your individual private companies can engage in a standards body. We are, as a nonprofit member organization, we cannot take technical, like, we won't, I should say, not that we couldn't, I guess we could. It is unlikely that we would take a strong opinion on, for example, what V8 should implement, because that is taking a position on something that a member org does, and that there be dragons, okay? So we're not probably going to do that. So that would be very unlikely. Now, if any of your member companies wanted to learn more about how they could get involved in standards, and they wanted to send employees to OpenJS community stuff and learn through that vector, that we would welcome them warmly. But, that's a line that we probably did not cross.
With the Winter CG in particular, is OpenJS or Node.js specifically going to be getting more involved there? I mentioned it earlier. There's a weird where it's weird that like James and I, as like Node contributors, are a part of this group, but yet we're not really doing anything for Node's sake in it, because him and I are both there for our respective companies. So is there a conflict of interest if I guess myself like was starting to act on behalf of Node and Vercel at Winter CG, or like is there a chance we're getting someone from Node to participate in that group?
So I think that it kind of points to number dos, right? We want, or the second point here. If the Node project wants to have someone that it says, okay, Ethan, we trust that you will represent our, like, the broad collective opinion, consensus opinion of our project in this community. We'd like for you to be our designated person. You'd say, oh, it's me, and then I would hook you up with what you needed to go, get into the W3C system and be part of that and all of that kind of thing. But I'm not going to dictate that for Node. Hell no. That's the project telling us we would like to engage in this way, and we would like Ethan and Wes to be our reps. And we would say, okay, cool. Let me make sure that you have all the tools that you need to do that effectively. And I think that's like the better path than us saying like, oh, we've just randomly, arbitrarily decided that Dylan should do it or that Jory should do it or whatever. That's not really a good, because it works better, and it will work better if the people that we send to these groups are knowledgeable about like the real problem space and are fair and balanced in their, in their representation of sort of, ideas and solutions and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So with this thing that Ethan just posted this morning about the package JSON, I think Node has a vested interest in that particular topic. Node has direct coupling to the format of package JSON. The proposal is to maybe standardize that underneath the banner of the Winter CG.
Oh, interesting.
And I was just thinking about it because I just posted a comment in there. From the Node side, if we were to go, say, speak on Node's behalf there is no currently existing, as far as I know, group that owns that in the Node side, right? Probably the closest would be the modules working group because of the work on like the entry. Oh, I just blanked on the exports. That's the word I was looking for. I'm wondering if there's some opportunity to like maybe formalize that from the standards working group and say like, this is how we see like maybe there needs to be like a charter, like maybe any representative from Node would need a backing chartered working group or that they report back to, right, on the Node side to give it more, maybe not legitimacy, but more like value, right? Because also you don't want the person to have to come back and report every single thing on like a TC call. Like, I don't know, like that.
Right, and you don't want to like the value for the worst thing is to think that you're like negotiating, solving problems with the right people, and then it turns out that somebody is like, wait a second, I have an opinion, and then that sort of takes you down, and that's what slows the standards development process. And so, we could advise the Node project to develop its own sort of like team, if you will. That maybe the TSC says, we're going to appoint a couple of folks to sort of task out the package. JS thing is, I think, maybe potentially salient to like a lot of our projects, not just Node. And so maybe maybe the OpenJS standards working group would be interested in doing that, because we'd be able to collect more feedback from just beyond, because I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that extends to me, makes me think about like whom at any of the OpenJS projects would be getting involved. And it's like I'm not on the Node TSC, but yet would I still be a good representative for the Node project then? Or like I like to just like, if I'm going to be the person for Node, not saying that I would, but like if that's the case, now do I need to like also have a seat in those meetings, or like do I need to be like who? It's one of those like, if we're adding this responsibility to a project, I guess I say if a project's taking on this responsibility, because it would be Node's decision, how do they balance that that new responsibility of getting involved and whatnot?
That's a good question, and it's one for, I mean, Node's probably the most dynamically governed project at Open. I mean, just kind of guessing on that. You've got a lot of different people who participate in a lot of different like working groups and sectors, and so it would be no small task for one person to try and represent the opinions of like all of those people, and then also trying to do that in like a fairly objective way. So, you know, I might suggest to the TSC that they find a couple of folks that they would, you know, trust to, and whether they need to be on the TSC or not, that's totally a different point. I would say less meetings is better for those folks. So, you know, maybe not. But I don't know. That's a really good question but I think, again, like this seems like a topic that would be very valuable for like a broader group of people. So even if Node wanted to just say, nope, we don't want to answer that question right now, you solve it over here, that would be fine.
Cool.
Yeah, I think the tension there is that if it's a spec, we're at least hoping that the technical direction that is chosen is agreeable to the Node project and the TSC.
Well, it almost has to be, right?
Well, in order to work, it absolutely has to be, right? And so I think where I think it would be interesting if the standards working group had, again, maybe put together for these specific types of cases, some sort of guidance that was like, here's a way that we think it can work really well, and then codify that. Because if say we were to both, and by the way, you did volunteer, you don't get a choice now that you said that. But if you started the thing, yeah, so you're definitely on the hook. But like we would not want to go into that being representatives of the viewpoint of the Node project if we didn't have that structural agreement with the TSC, right? Like otherwise, like I think actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like something actually probably formal has to happen for this to work from the Node project, probably from, like you said, all these other projects that the foundation is participating in who have a stake in what is the package JSON spec, right? Like we probably need package installers to be, I don't know, I don't think actually any of them are members of the foundation. But if there was some level of like recommendation from the foundation we could take to them and say, hey, here's what you're signing up for. Like we're going to all be working toward a technical direction. NPM, can you come to this meeting? Well, that too, yeah. But that's what I'm just saying. I feel like some sort of recommendation from like the standards working group would be very helpful in approaching that conversation, so that we have like a playbook to go off of or something.
And I think that's like something that I could add to our list of things that we want to work on, which would be more like playbooky type things. And you know, one of the things that causes efforts to fail is not having a really tightly scoped problem and like saying this is in bounds and this is out of bounds. And the better you're like, it's almost the out of bounds stuff that's even more important to like say out loud, because that helps everybody frame productively around acceptable solutions.
Yeah, and it makes me think about Webpack is a foundation project, correct?
It is.
So Webpack would be very much interested in standardization of package JSON, and it's like, let's make sure that they are at the table for these discussions, because seems like the perfect way for that all to happen. It's like, how can the foundation support Webpack and Node.js, and making sure both bodies are well represented in the potential advancements that are being made in a new standards body. So it's awesome.
Love it. So these are some of the things that that we care to know from you all, and again, this whole process of feedback from the projects to the spec devs, and then impact, like spec devs made a decision, this is where they're going with direction wise, is there, what's the impact on our projects? Like that whole chain of just understanding is part of what we want to improve and facilitate. So if there are additional ideas or thoughts or things that we can do to make this more just easy. Like, again, I don't believe in meetings. I believe in really good meetings, but just fewer of them, hopefully. So I'm not trying to sign up people for more standards meetings. Yes, Darcy. Ethan is responsible and saves battery by turning the mic off.
Check. There we go. I know I've come to like one of these meetings, and also I was a part of what I think is like a successful collaboration from the Node package. No, sorry, not package, but the tooling working group, where we essentially got a bunch of people that were not even core contributors to come around the argument parsing sort of design spec API, build something, and then we had somebody who, through Benco, basically be able to propose that, land it, and get it into core. I'm wondering if the same kind of model would be really helpful here, is like bringing the kind of knowledge of like from the current representatives that we have, almost like bring that forward to this working group. Like, how do you design what TC39 like spec would look like? Bring that back, get a bunch of people that aren't going to be sitting at that table involved in like putting together something. Like for me, I was really excited and still am about the thought of like potentially standardizing more broadly Semver. Like it truly is one of these things that I think that in 5-10 years, if you were able to like have a Semver like web API, you would be like, why didn't I have this before? And like a lot of people would be just like, oh, it makes so much sense. So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can like bring forward like the kind of processes or like the documentation that we would have to put together. And like, I'm willing to come to like this forum, but like I might not be the right person to then take it once it's kind of put together into a good way to present to these groups like TC39. I might not be the right person, but Jordan could go and present on our behalf. You know?
I think that's a good idea. That kind of also speaks to like recipe / playbooks. One thing that we do have to be mindful of when we, as a group of people, come together and put a spec together is, of course, in the web space, we're largely contributing to royalty-free standards. The provenance of IP is still something that is very important. And hence I think one of the reasons like we probably won't within the OpenJS Foundation like be a place where we try and standardize things is because we just don't have the infrastructure to manage that. But I think there's tools out there that we could leverage that would kind of help with that concern, and then allow kind of that sort of pre-specification phase effectively to happen, so that then whatever you guys create together can safely be taken to, ECMA or wherever for further standardization. Yeah. Hi, friend.
Hey, I think one of the bigger struggles here with this sort of coordination is that every group will tend to have wildly different governance like in general. So, for example, on a small open source project, it might be one person. On, TC39, you have to convince a room full of people, and there's different requirements for what WG and W3C. On Node, like something that's not controversial, like 2 collaborators is enough to get it in. On something that's, but the question who speaks for the project, I don't think anyone can ever speak for Node, because the current makeup of the TSC can change, and the only thing that is a guarantee is that when the TSC has made a decision and its makeup has not changed since then, and in every other respect, that Node can't cannot and has not been able to stick to things. And that's just the nature of the governance it's chosen. As you said, it's dynamically governed, right? And so trying to figure out all these things, like who makes the decisions in Webpack, right? The original creator, I have no idea. Like maybe Soka or whatever has some sort of veto power that the other contributors don't. I don't know. We're having this discussion earlier today about who has the keys to a very popular open source project, and like there's lots of hard questions there. So I think that I'm trying to be as diplomatic and vague as I can here, right? But I think that my advice personally, my advice would be figure out how you can get as close as possible to a project consensus, or for all of the different groups that are involved in whatever problem. Like for standardizing Semver, you have to get a significant percentage of the 8 people that run the Semver spec to be on board, and like that's just one of many groups you'd have to involve. And so it's unfortunately there's not like a silver bullet where you can write a guide and just be like, here's how you do it, because it's just a huge set of politics and subtlety and nuance for each individual group.
Well, so maybe guide isn't a bit like patterns. I mean, they're like, there's sort of different expressions of just like, here is something that could work, that has worked. Your mileage may vary given variables of human beings that are involved, because that happens. So, but I think you're actually giving me a little bit more like of a push toward we should maybe do more of the coordination on the standards WG level, instead of, because like my initial attitude about this has been just give as much power and agency to the projects as humanly possible. Like it is their world, they should drive it. But it feels like maybe a little bit more help, a little bit more structure on our side might actually empower them more. So yeah.
I'm just wondering though, like a project can't would Node sit at the table at TC39, or would it be OpenJS?
Here's like something that might happen. Like the TC might say, oh, well, this is this XYZ feature. How would this work in Node, or what would the Node project say about that? And we've got folks, obviously, Guy and Jordan and others who are also very close to the project, who might be able to provide that feedback in the room because they go to the TC meetings and that kind of stuff. But if there was something more specific, my hope would be that our OpenJS representatives at ECMA would say, not that they speak for the Node project, but that they would take the action item of, my hope, when I saw guys would say, they would say, okay, well, that's a great question. Let's take that back to the TSC and get you.
Yeah. Well, if it's not, there's no project associated with that work. Like in the case of Semver, it's like a theoretical standard that
it's theoretical.
I believe that should.
It's not our project. So I don't know.
Another similar one, and what I was going to say to Jordan's comment. So we were, Ben Coe and I and a few others were working on a V2 of conventional commits for a little while. One of the things that stalled it out was Ben was searching for a standards body to host, and it was very difficult. Ben had a ton of people just stop responding, and there was no what's the actual technical term? Provenance of the IP?
Yeah.
Right? So there was like some problems with the original, missing provenance.
Yeah.
But even if, and this is the response to that, is even if Ben had some place to go to just say like, give me a general swag at the, I just used an Alexism. Our team jokes, Alex says, give me a general go at where could this fit? What is the bullet point list of what does it take to be in TC39 versus, an ECMA standard versus whatever. I think Ben would have probably found that super useful.
Yeah.
And the work stalled out a bit just because Ben spent all his energy probably trying to figure that stuff out and not the energy actually
on
getting
the
it done.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's something I remember that. And that's been long, it feels like ages ago.
It time flies.
Kind of was, yeah. But I mean, I think in the intervening time, we've got a little bit more. So I mentioned this community specification license. That would be one solution for the IP problem, right? So if we were able to set conventional commits up on a community spec system, then they could take it to another organization with more authority, more credibility to do that. So
Maybe a in the weeds question, but with something like this, since we didn't have the original folks who
just
invented the spec,
rewrite it.
well, I'm just wondering, like, if we did a V2, how different does it technically actually have to be to not run into the IP? We don't have their sign-off problem.
okay, this is my favorite thing to say. I am not a lawyer.
Okay.
I am not your lawyer. So that's a question of deep complexity that you can't just sort of I mean, if you were writing a specification based on something that was like some source code that was licensed Apache 2, you could probably do that with a degree of confidence that you're not going to have a problem, but you are going to have to write you're going to have to rewrite.
And like for the package JSON thing, were we going to hit the same issue immediately?
I don't know. Maybe.
So I would kind of like to almost like a similar question. Can I come to the standards working group and say, hey, like I'm motivated to standardize SEMVer. Where do we do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of had that conversation, didn't we? A few months ago, last month? I don't know, time. Yeah, I mean, so you, like, people will generally in the meetings tell you we think it's a good idea or we think it's that's a terrible idea.
Cool.
Just kidding. No, we're more diplomatic than that. I mean, I think sometimes people come and like the first question is, do you agree this is a good idea? And we say, yes, this is a great idea. And then the next question might be, okay, how might I go about doing this? So what? Now we draw the rest of the owl. And the rest of the owl is we need a space for you to start collaborating safely, right? Safely from an IP perspective. So as you put your ideas on paper, as those ideas make it into a specification that hopefully people use and implement, you don't want some jerk suing everybody who implemented that for a bunch of money, because that sucks. That'd be rude. So we want to make sure that you're setting up a pre-standardization process effectively that is going to protect your work and make it very clear that like Vercel is not going to ape out because Ethan, contributed something that they otherwise would have patented. So yeah.
Which is so like, when's the next meeting? Because I want to talk about package JSON.
Yeah. So we meet bi-weekly. So the next meeting is the 18th. And if you wanted to present or show you'd go to the repo and just open an issue and tag it with our agenda issue or label, and we'd be on.
Fantastic.
And I'm not sure the question got answered, but if it isn't a project, like again, the conventional commit stuff is not an OpenJS thing. What does that look like? Like if we were to try to come to the group with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would definitely provide. I mean, my job at the Linux Foundation is to do standards. I do standards for all of our projects, and so we get a lot of inquiries from potential projects all the time, and that's effectively what I would just sort of say, here are the options available to you. You're not an OpenJS project, so we're not going to say that OpenJS thinks that you should do this, but we can give you pointers to how you might get that done if there's an existing related community group or project underway or whatever.
Like one thing I would love to be able to do is have somebody who is a lawyer and can officially give advice on the specifics of one of these topics.
So
is there an avenue for that?
So no. What we can do and what I can do, I have no problem saying, here is like the legal framework, and here are the things that you have to look out for, that I have to make sure that our projects are looking out for. We can give you that generic advice. We cannot represent you. We cannot represent the projects. So if there is a legal question, we can help you find, and we did this for Webpack, like we can help source somebody who can legally represent you. But it's beyond sort of the generic, like, well, here's the framework for how you think about this, and here's what the courts have said in the past, or here's how the things have been interpreted. We can't really go beyond that, though.
Is there any funding avenue? Because that could, in theory, get expensive for.
Well, it could, but we have to ask, like, what's our legal question, right? Like, why do you need a lawyer? What is the legal question for which we need counsel? And if that's, is that.
Who was first?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say the meeting's on the 16th.
Oh, 16th. Cool. I'm good at dates.
Oh, take this, sorry.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
To repeat, meetings on the 16th.
Thank you. I'm good at dates, too. Yeah. So anyway, I think, so one of the things that we could advise you on is whether you needed a lawyer.
Yeah.
That's something that could be a question that we answer for you. But most of the time when people think they need a lawyer, they don't. And then when people don't think they need a lawyer, they do. So that's how that goes. So the other thing that we're kind of like running out of time for is like the other objective, which is making this more approachable for just developers, right, to get involved. My own path into standards was fraught with a lot of trolls and a lot of bullies and a lot of jerks. And so I'm like, no, we're going to say no to jerks. We're going to make it as easy as we can to get involved. And so, how can we best surface the depth of experience that our community has in a scalable way so that people can confidently start engaging or engage from a place of like safe learning and that kind of stuff, right? So how do we help you start a project successfully? So the conventional commits, I mean, this is perfect. This is exactly like what we should be helping our projects do. How can we help pass on tribal knowledge and or like the baggage of like, there be dragons, let's not go down that path again. What do they need to know to be successful? What are some skills that they can start to develop if they really want to like grow their career? It's not a secret that a lot of these spaces are not necessarily open source friendly all the time. And we think that we have a lot of positive values to bring to the table there. So how can we do that? And I think we do that by empowering each of you to be your awesome selves and get involved. So anyway, this is the sort of the other side of that. But yeah, so if there's stuff that that other people would like to learn or would like mentorship on, I'll volunteer Jordan. Just kidding. Yeah. But like Michael Champion, who's like OG from Microsoft, is on our committee. Yeah, they're great. There's some awesome people, but and they'd love to help you. So, yeah, Dylan.
Oh, yeah, I got it here. I'll run it over.
You just had a coffee. Why are you back there?
I'm out.
Okay, I got it.
Got to get my daily 8 in, right? So, yeah. So I think the last point's really interesting because, early on in the web, specs were like new things that had never been done before. And then a lot of them didn't get adopted. And then the web said, hey, we should just standardize what's already been done. And so we just spent like 10 or 15 years kind of doing that. And now we're kind of at the point where we're having to standardize things that aren't possible without a spec again. So do you think the foundation, from what I'm hearing, mostly we're focused on like the gaps, like things that have fallen through the gaps. We're not really looking to like standardize Node, like, or something that big, right? So are we kind of focused on just kind of filling in the gaps that are causing us problems? Or are we looking to actually standardize on things that are like, hey, we've got 3 different open source projects that kind of do testing. Do we want to standardize a way to do testing in JavaScript or something like that? Or what do you think our focus should be?
That's a great question. I mean, I am still in the camp of there are a lot of gaps to fill, and so and we haven't done a great job, tackling those gaps and solving. I mean, really, the problems we should solve are the problems that real developers who use our projects and use the web platform have. And if it's not a real problem, then let's not spend our time on it, because that's going to just, it's not going to end up getting used. So my preference is for us to think about, but I mean, that's my opinion. Your opinion could be totally different, and I respect that. We also have, to your point, a lot of projects at OpenJS that solve, that are testing utilities and things like that. Christian works on WebDriver, and the WebDriver spec. So are there things, and then there's like test 262, and there's the web platform tests and that sort of stuff. Like, are there things that gaps we can fill there while providing a space for those folks who care about testing to convene and surface gaps and that kind of stuff, and differentiate where there's like something to differentiate on. But that's my opinion. But ultimately, what gets done is what people show up and do, right? So.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to bring up on this topic was, and I think we've spoken about it before, but just visibility and communication in the project, and how to make ones, how to build those bridges so that people in the projects are aware of what is going on, and there's visibility into what people are doing on standards and what standards are part of these efforts in standards bodies through the OpenJS Foundation, and then also how people can get involved and influence that, so they, if people can see that there are these things and see somewhere that, Darcy's interested in working on a Semver spec, and then someone else says, hey, I'm also interested in that, I want to, join in on that effort. How can they sort of become aware of that and get their own feedback into that process, or put their own, and so just visibility and creating those communication channels, I think, is something that would be great to think about and focus on.
I think that's really great feedback, and I think we haven't done a very good job surfacing, the conversations that have happened, like that Darcy, for example, gave that proposal and that sort of stuff. Then there's like, again, like the reports from the plenaries that come our way. This is really getting me thinking about how to make sure that when we do share information, that it's also contextual, that it's useful, that the so what is there in some cases, because not everybody has the experience to know why it matters, right? Or like what the implication of that decision might be. So I think that's an area of improvement that we can focus on. But I think another way that we'll sort of hopefully grow that muscle a little bit is, again, by just recording where our impact has been felt and like what patterns worked, right? Like, the work that you've done, the work that Miles has done. I think that's very meaningful, and recording that and sharing that out, I think is learning through the case studies of what's worked and what hasn't is going to be good. So we're at time. Come to our meeting, if you want to. So.